The metallic tang of blood filled my mouth before I even registered the pain. My head swam, the garish floral wallpaper of our dining room swirling into a nauseating kaleidoscope. Below me, the shattered remains of a ceramic bowl lay scattered across the linoleum, looking like bleached bones. A thick grayish gruel, my prescribed dinner, was splattered across the floor, the cabinets, and my own shaking hands. It was a scene of domestic carnage, a miniature battlefield where the only casualty was, as always, me. Look at this mess. Are you that clumsy? Or just that desperate to avoid a healthy meal? Mark's voice, sharp and cold as a shard of the broken bowl, cut through my daze. He stood over me, his 6-foot frame casting a long, oppressive shadow. His handsome face, the one that had once made my heart flutter, was twisted into a mask of familiar disgust. He wasn't looking at the mess. He was looking at me, his eyes raking over my body with contempt. And then he said it. The words that echoed from a life I'd already lived, a death I'd already died. Honestly, Clara, you're lucky I even try to help you. But you just keep getting fatter. It's pathetic. A chilling wave of déjà vu washed over me, so potent it felt like stepping into a phantom limb. The acrid smell of the bland vegetable broth, the specific pattern of the shattered bowl, the cruel glint in his eyes. I had lived this exact moment before. This was the night he'd say those words, the night we would argue, the night I would run upstairs sobbing and blinded by tears. The night I would trip at the top of the landing where he had accidentally left his golf bag. The night I would fall, my neck snapping with a sickening crack on the polished newel post at the bottom. The night I died. But this time, as I looked up at him from the floor, something was different. The tears didn't come. The familiar, soul-crushing shame was absent, replaced by an icy, diamond-hard clarity. In my previous life, this moment had been the beginning of my end. In this one, it was the starting pistol for his. The blood in my mouth was from biting my tongue, a small sacrifice to stifle the hysterical laugh that threatened to bubble up from my chest. He called me fat again, and in doing so, he had just handed me the keys to my own cage and sealed his own damnation. My unfair advantage wasn't a secret power or a hidden benefactor. It was memory. It was the detailed, agonizing, and now exquisitely useful memory of the next 2 years of his life. A life he was about to live, but one I had already watched burn to the ground. I had a front row seat to the future, and I was about to rewrite the entire script, starting with his final act. My first life with Mark was a masterclass in erosion. It wasn't a sudden landslide, but the slow, patient work of water on rock, chipping away at my sense of self until nothing remained but a hollowed-out shell shaped like his perfect, pliable wife. We met in my final year of university. I was vibrant, confident, studying architecture with a passion that felt like a fire in my veins. I had friends who made me laugh until I couldn't breathe, and a future that felt as open and limitless as the sky. Mark was a junior financial analyst at a prestigious firm, older by 5 years, exuding a worldly charm that I, in my youthful naivete, mistook for wisdom. He was handsome, ambitious, and utterly captivated by me. Or so I thought. Looking back with the terrible clarity of Rebirth, I see the red flags were there from the beginning, fluttering like tiny scarlet warnings in a hurricane I refused to see. He'd gently suggest a different outfit when I was about to go out with my friends. Something a little more modest. He'd critique my portfolio, framing his dismissive comments as constructive criticism, designed to help me in the real world. He'd call my best friend, Amy, a bad influence, subtly planting seeds of doubt about her loyalty. He was a sculptor, and I was his clay. The first time he mentioned my weight, it was 6 months into our relationship. We were celebrating his promotion, and I'd bought a beautiful new dress, a soft blue silk that made me feel like a movie star. I twirled for him in the living room, expecting a compliment. Instead, he frowned, a thoughtful, concerned look on his face. "That's a lovely color, honey," he'd said, his voice smooth as oil. "But do you think that cut is the most flattering? Maybe we should start going to the gym together, as a couple's activity. It would be fun." It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in the pretty paper of a suggestion. And like a fool, I agreed. I wanted to be the perfect partner. The gym session started, and so did the diet. At first, it was about health: kale smoothies, quinoa salads, lean protein. But soon, his control tightened. He started preparing my meals himself, claiming he enjoyed taking care of me. The meals grew smaller, blander. He'd weigh my portions of chicken breast, measure out a half cup of brown rice with the precision of a scientist. If I dared to eat a piece of cake at a birthday party, I'd be met with a sigh of disappointment on the car ride home. "I'm just trying to help you be your best self, Clara," he'd murmur, his hand resting on my thigh in a gesture that felt more like ownership than affection. My world began to shrink. My passion for architecture faded. My ambitious designs criticized as unrealistic and overly complicated. Why not focus on something simpler, he'd suggest, like interior design? He convinced me to turn down a promising internship at a top firm in another city because long-distance relationships never work and I can't bear to be without you. I ended up taking a dull, part-time drafting job at a small local company, a position that required none of my creativity and offered no path for advancement. It was perfect for him. It kept me small, dependent, and close to home. My friends drifted away, tired of Mark's condescending attitude and my constant cancellations. Amy was the last to go. She'd tried to warn me. "He's isolating you, Clara," she'd pleaded one afternoon over coffee the last time we ever met. "He's controlling you. This isn't love." I defended him, parroting the excuses he'd fed me. "He's just looking out for me. He supports me." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful pity. "No, he's diminishing you," she said softly, "and you're letting him." I stormed out, furious and hurt, and didn't answer her calls after that. Mark was pleased. He'd won. His mother, Eleanor, was his chief accomplice, a woman who looked like she was perpetually sucking on a lemon. She treated me with a thinly veiled disdain from day one. She'd visit our home unannounced, running a white-gloved finger over the furniture to check for dust and rearranging my kitchen to her own liking. She was the one who bought me the bathroom scale for my birthday one year. "Just a little something to help you stay on track, dear," she'd chirped, her smile never reaching her cold, calculating eyes. She and Mark operated like a pincer movement, a two-front war on my self-esteem. He was the covert operative using psychological warfare, while she was the blatant enforcer, her criticisms as subtle as a sledgehammer. "That dress makes you look rather matronly, Clara," she'd comment at family gatherings. "Are you sure you want another potato? Mark tells me you're trying so hard." Yeah, in my first life, I internalized their poison. I began to believe them. I saw a failure in the mirror, a fat, unattractive, incompetent woman who was lucky to have a man like Mark. A man who was so patient, so dedicated to fixing me. My weight fluctuated, the stress and misery causing me to binge on the rare occasions I was alone, which only led to more guilt, more shame, and more of Mark's disappointed sighs. I became a ghost in my own life, haunting the hallways of a house that felt more like a prison, my only purpose to be a project for my husband and his mother. My death was the pathetic, inevitable conclusion to this slow-motion tragedy. The argument on that final night had been about a business dinner. Mark was being honored as Analyst of the Year at his firm's annual gala. I had bought a new dress, a deep emerald green velvet, spending more money than I should have in a desperate attempt to feel beautiful again. When I tried it on for him, he didn't even look up from his phone. "I don't think so," he'd said flatly. "It shows your arms too much. Wear the black one with the long sleeves." When I protested, his anger flared. He accused me of trying to embarrass him, of being selfish. The argument escalated, and then came the line, "You just keep getting fatter. It's pathetic." I fled upstairs, my vision blurred with tears. I didn't see the golf bag he'd left propped against the wall at the top of the stairs. My foot caught on a strap, and I tumbled forward. The fall seemed to last an eternity. There was a moment of weightlessness, a flash of surprise, and then an explosion of pain at the base of my skull as I hit the newel post. My last conscious thought was not of love or regret, but a single, startlingly clear realization. He left it there on purpose, and then, darkness. A vast, silent, empty void. I don't know how long I was there. It felt like a second in 1,000 years. There was no sensation, no thought, just an absence of being. Then, a gasp. A frantic, desperate intake of air that burned my lungs. My eyes flew open. I wasn't in the void. I was in my bed, the morning sun streaming through the window, the digital clock on the bedside table reading 7 a.m. My neck didn't hurt. My body felt normal, heavier than my ideal weight, but whole, healthy, alive. Mark was in the shower, the sound of the water running a familiar morning rhythm. I stumbled out of bed and looked in the mirror. It was me, but a version of me from 6 months ago. The date on my phone confirmed it. It was 6 months to the day before the gala, 6 months before my death. The confusion was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest. I thought it was a dream, a vivid, horrifying nightmare. But the memories were too sharp, too real. The feeling of the velvet dress, the specific cadence of his cruel words, the gut-wrenching certainty of his intent as I fell. It was all branded onto my soul. It took me a full week to accept the impossible truth. I had died, and I had come back. I had been given a second chance. And as I lived through the days, hearing the same conversations, seeing the same news reports, I knew my knowledge of the future was perfect. My second chance wasn't just about survival. It was about retribution. The universe, for some unknown, miraculous reason, had handed me a weapon. And I would spend the next 6 months sharpening it to a razor's edge. Lying there on the kitchen floor, the gray sludge of my dinner cooling around me, the echo of my past life's final moments ringing in my ears, the last vestiges of the old Clara died. The woman who cried, who pleaded, who tried to be good enough, was gone. In her place, a cold, calm certainty settled deep in my bones. He wanted me to be smaller, to shrink, to disappear, and I would. I would become so small he wouldn't see me coming. I would become a ghost in his life, silently orchestrating his downfall from the shadows he himself had created. My plan began to form, not as a single grand scheme, but as a series of interconnected threads, a web of his own making that I would simply pull tight. The first thread was my body. In my past life, his obsession with my weight was the tool he used to break my spirit. In this life, my transformation would be the banner of my liberation. But I wouldn't do it for him. I wouldn't starve myself on his miserable broths and flavorless steamed vegetables. I would do it for me. I would reclaim my physical self not as an object for his approval, but as the vessel of my own strength. The second thread was his money. Mark worshipped at the altar of wealth. His self-worth was intrinsically tied to his portfolio, his bonuses, his status as a financial wizard. He was arrogant, and his arrogance, I knew, was about to lead him to a massive miscalculation. In my previous life, I remembered him gloating for weeks about a genius move he was planning. He was going to short a tech stock called Innovate Futures, which was about to take a massive, unexpected dive due to a scandal involving its CEO. He had inside information, a tip from a morally bankrupt colleague, and he was planning to go all in, leveraging their joint assets to make a killing. Last time he succeeded, and the influx of cash made him even more insufferable, more powerful in our relationship. This time, I would be waiting. The third thread was his pride. Beyond money, Mark craved admiration. He needed to be seen as the perfect husband, the brilliant analyst, the man who had it all. And a key part of that image was his fidelity. He was having an affair. I knew it in my last life, a gut feeling I could never prove. He was too careful. His mistress was a junior analyst at his firm, a mousy but ambitious woman named Brenda. I remembered him mentioning her name dismissively, calling her competent but plain, a classic tactic to throw me off the scent. I remembered the late nights at the office, the business trips on weekends. This time, I wouldn't just have a gut feeling, I would have irrefutable proof. And the final, most satisfying thread was his mother. Eleanor wasn't just an enabler, she was the architect of his narcissism. She was also, as I recalled from a drunken, boastful conversation Mark had with his father one Christmas, engaged in some light tax fraud. She ran a small, high-end interior design business for her wealthy friends, insisting on being paid in cash or through gifts to avoid declaring the income. It was small time, but it was illegal. An anonymous tip to the IRS at just the right moment would be devastating to her social standing and her carefully curated image of upper class propriety. That night, after cleaning up the mess in the kitchen under Mark's watchful, irritated gaze, I did not cry. I went to the bathroom, looked at my own reflection, and smiled. It was a strange, unfamiliar expression. It wasn't happy. It was predatory. I opened my laptop and made my first move. It wasn't a grand, dramatic gesture. It was small, silent, and digital. I installed a keylogger on Mark's home office computer. Then, I reactivated my old secret social media account, the one I'd had in college that he'd forced me to delete. My first message was to my old best friend, Amy. It was short and simple. "You were right about everything. Can we talk?" Her reply came almost instantly. "I've been waiting for this message for 3 years. Name the time and place." The first brick of my old life, my real life, was laid back into place. My war had begun. The next 6 months were a study in duality. To Mark and his mother, I was the picture of compliance. I became the perfect penitent wife, finally taking his advice to heart. I ate the bland meals he prepared, but I supplemented them in secret, hiding protein bars and healthy snacks in my car and at the office. I started going to the gym every morning before he woke up. When he'd comment with a smug, self-satisfied air, "See? I told you a little discipline was all you needed," I would smile sweetly and thank him for his guidance, all the while feeling the steel hardening in my spine. My transformation was slow at first, then dramatic. The weight began to melt away, not from starvation, but from real work. I found a joy in the burn of a long run, the power in lifting weights, the feeling of control over my own body that I hadn't felt in years. I was rediscovering the strong, capable woman I used to be, and she was furious. She was fueling every workout. With every pound I lost, I felt my anger and resolve becoming more concentrated, more potent. I wasn't just losing fat, I was shedding years of his oppression, his voice, his smothering presence. My skin started to glow, my hair regained its shine, and my eyes, once dull with unhappiness, now held a bright, dangerous glint. Mark, of course, took all the credit. He saw my transformation not as my achievement, but as his successful project. He grew more possessive, his compliments laced with a new, unwelcome strain of lust. He'd grab my waist, his hand spanning its new, smaller circumference, and whisper, "You see how good I am for you?" I'd let him, playing the part of the grateful, adoring wife, while my mind was miles away reviewing bank statements and encrypted emails I'd accessed via the keylogger. My reunion with Amy was like rain after a long drought. We met at a small, out-of-the-way cafe. The moment she saw me, her eyes filled with tears, and she threw her arms around me. "Oh, Clara," she whispered, "I was so worried." I told her everything. Not about the rebirth, she would have thought I'd lost my mind, but about the abuse, the control, the slow, systematic dismantling of my life. I laid it all bare, and she listened, her expression hardening from sympathy to a cold fury that mirrored my own. She became my co-conspirator, my confidant, my anchor to the real world. She helped me set up a new bank account in my own name, a secret place to start stashing away funds. She was a lawyer, and she gave me quiet, off-the-record advice on how to gather evidence without raising suspicion. Using the keylogger was disturbingly easy. Mark was arrogant and careless, believing me to be a technological simpleton. I found everything I needed. I found his secret trading account, his passwords, and his detailed notes on the Innovate Futures short. I saw the exact date he planned to execute the trade, a date that was now circled in red on my private calendar. I found the emails to Brenda, filled with sickening pet names and plans for their illicit trysts at a boutique hotel across town. I screenshotted everything, saving it all to a secure cloud account that Amy helped me set up. The financial part of my plan required a delicate touch. Our largest joint asset was a brokerage account containing our life savings, which Mark managed with an iron fist. My foreknowledge was my ace. I knew that 2 weeks before the Innovate Futures scandal broke, another, smaller tech company, Nexus Dynamics, was going to get a surprise buyout, causing its stock to triple overnight. Last time, Mark had missed it, kicking himself for weeks. This time, I wouldn't. One evening, I approached him with a feigned air of wifely interest. Honey? I began, twisting my hands nervously. I was reading this article about investing, and it mentioned diversifying. All of our money is in those blue chip stocks. Don't you think it's a bit risky? He was condescending, of course. Clara, please. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. I know what I'm doing. That was the opening I needed. I pushed using the persona of a timid but stubborn woman. I know, but my dad always said never to keep all your eggs in one basket. There's this little company, Nexus Dynamics. My friend's husband works there, and he says they're doing amazing things, just a little bit, as a favor to me, to help me feel more secure. He scoffed, but he was also distracted by my appearance. I was wearing a new dress that hugged my new figure, and he was more interested in getting me into the bedroom than arguing about finances. He relented, treating it like an indulgence for a silly child. Fine, he sighed. We'll move a small amount, 10%. But when it goes nowhere, you don't get to say I told you so. We moved 20%. I'd accidentally added an extra zero on the transfer request form I'd given him to sign. He was so arrogant, he didn't even check. 2 weeks later, the news of the Nexus Dynamics buyout broke. Our investment didn't just triple, it quadrupled. Mark was stunned. He tried to take credit, of course, claiming he'd had a good feeling about it, but the seed was planted. I had, in his eyes, gotten lucky. He was so pleased with the unexpected windfall that he became even more reckless, more confident in his own genius. He was now primed for the kill. He decided to pour not just the original savings, but the entire Nexus profit into his Innovate Futures short. It was more than he'd planned in my previous life. It was everything. While he was busy counting his future chickens, I was setting the stage for his social immolation. I used my knowledge of his schedule, gleaned from his emails with Brenda, to engineer a few chance encounters. I bumped into her at the coffee shop near their office, feigning surprise. You must be Brenda. Mark has said such wonderful things about your work. I was all smiles and sunshine, the friendly, non-threatening wife. I invited her to lunch. She was hesitant, but my performance was flawless. I painted a picture of Mark as a demanding, difficult boss, creating a false sense of camaraderie. He's a genius, of course, I'd say with an eye roll, but he's so focused he can be a little intense, you know? She agreed, her relief palpable. She thought she'd found an ally. She had no idea she was having lunch with her executioner. The final piece of the puzzle was Eleanor. The annual charity gala for the Children's Hospital was the pinnacle of her social calendar. She was the head of the organizing committee, and her reputation lived and died on its success. It was also the night of Mark's Analyst of the Year award, the same gala from my previous life. It was the perfect stage, a place filled with all their friends, colleagues, and rivals. My anonymous, carefully worded tip to the IRS was scheduled to be delivered 2 days before the gala, with specific instructions to investigate her accounts and to follow up with a visit to her home. I knew from my past life that she always collected the final cash donations for the auction at her house the day of the gala. The timing would be exquisite. The day of the gala arrived. It was exactly 6 months after I'd woken up in this new reality. I stood before the full-length mirror, and for the first time in years, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because of the weight loss, but because of the look in her eyes. The fear was gone. The insecurity was gone. All that remained was a cold, calm fire. I was wearing a dress of my own choosing. It was a stunning, backless gown of liquid silver that clung to every curve. It was a declaration of war. When I walked down the stairs, Mark was waiting in the foyer, adjusting his bow tie. He turned and his jaw literally dropped. He stared, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, awe, and a raw primal ownership that made my skin crawl. Clara, he breathed, you look incredible. I know, I said, my voice cool and even. I walked past him, a faint smile on my lips, leaving him speechless in my wake. The balance of power in our relationship had just irrevocably shifted, and he was too stunned to even realize it. We drove to the gala in silence, the air in the car thick with his confusion and my triumphant anticipation. The show was about to begin. The ballroom was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos, the air buzzing with polite chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses. When we entered, a hush fell over the people nearest to us. Heads turned. Whispers followed in our wake. I saw people who had known me for years doing double takes, their eyes wide with disbelief. They were used to the dowdy, overweight, invisible Clara. They didn't know what to make of the woman in the silver dress who walked with her head held high, a serene, almost dangerous smile playing on her lips. Mark, for his part, swelled with pride, misinterpreting their shock as admiration for him, for the man who had so clearly fixed his wife. He steered me through the room like a trophy, his hand clamped firmly on the small of my back. We made our way to the table reserved for his firm. Brenda was already there, looking nervous, and, as Mark had once said, decidedly plain in a beige dress. When she saw me, her face went pale. I gave her a dazzling smile. "Brenda, you look lovely. I'm so glad you could make it." I sat down next to her, deliberately positioning myself between her and Mark, and engaged her in cheerful, banal conversation, all the while feeling Mark's simmering irritation. This wasn't how he'd envisioned his night of triumph. The first act of my play began with a simple text message. I excused myself to the ladies' room and sent a pre-written message from a burner phone to Sarah, Brenda's best friend and a notorious gossip. The message was simple. "If you want to know who Brenda is sleeping with, check the photos I just airdropped to you. Look for the guy at table 12 who can't stop staring at her." I had taken the photos myself over the past few weeks. Pictures of Mark and Brenda leaving the boutique hotel, holding hands in a dark corner of a bar, a damning collection of their carelessness. I walked back to the table just in time to see Sarah gasp, look at her phone, and then stare directly at our table with wide, horrified eyes. The first ripples of the scandal were spreading. The second act began during the awards ceremony. Mark's category was announced. As his name was called for Analyst of the Year, he stood up, preening, and gave me a condescending kiss on the cheek. "Wish me luck," he whispered, as if he needed it. While he walked toward the stage, I pulled out my own phone. A few weeks prior, I had helped Mark prepare his presentation for the gala, a short slideshow celebrating his achievements. While loading it onto the master computer for the event, I had added a hidden, password-protected folder, a folder titled Personal, a folder containing every single screenshot of his illicit emails and texts with Brenda. Now, I simply sent a text to the AV technician, a young man I had researched and knew was a tech wizard with a mischievous streak. "Emergency. Mr. Thorne needs the file from the Personal folder in his presentation. Password is Master of the Universe 1. Display it now." Mark was on stage, accepting his award, his face beaming with smug satisfaction. He began his speech. "I'd like to thank the board for this incredible honor," he started. "It's been a banner year, one that wouldn't have been possible without foresight." Behind him, the giant screen flickered. Instead of the corporate logo, a familiar email interface appeared. The subject line was "Tonight." The sender was Mark. The recipient was Brenda. And the first line of the email, now magnified to 10 feet tall for the entire ballroom to see, read, "Can't wait to get this boring dinner over with and get you out of that beige dress. My idiot wife has no idea. Meet me at the Regency at 11?" A collective gasp swept through the room. Mark, oblivious, continued his speech until the sound of the crowd's shock finally penetrated his bubble of self-congratulation. He turned. He saw the screen. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickly gray. He froze, his mouth hanging open, the heavy glass award looking like a comical prop in his limp hand. On screen, the AV tech, clearly enjoying himself, began to scroll. More emails, more texts, each one more damning than the last, filled with his insults about me, his colleagues, his clients. It was a live broadcast of his own treachery. Brenda let out a small, strangled sob and fled the room. All eyes were on me. I didn't storm out. I didn't cry. I simply took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne, holding their gazes with a look of serene, heartbreaking betrayal I had practiced for weeks. I was the wronged wife, the tragic victim, and I had just won the sympathy of every person in that room. The third and most glorious act began just as Mark was being escorted off the stage by a horrified event coordinator. His phone, which he'd left on the table, began to buzz violently. It was his father. I answered it, putting it on speaker for the benefit of those at our table. "Mark, where are you?" His father's panicked voice blared. "You need to get to your mother's house, now. There are people here. They're from the IRS. They have a warrant. They're going through everything." I feigned a gasp of shock. "Oh my goodness, what's happening?" I asked, my voice trembling with manufactured fear. Mark stumbled back to the table just in time to hear the news, his face crumbling into utter despair. The three pillars of his world, his career, his reputation, and his mother's carefully constructed empire, were all crashing down simultaneously in the most public way imaginable. But I wasn't finished. This was the moment I had waited for. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. The entire room was silent now, watching the drama unfold. I looked directly at the wreck of the man who had been my husband. "Mark," I said, my voice clear and carrying across the stunned silence. "Do you remember that tech stock, Innovate Futures?" He stared at me, his eyes blank with incomprehension. "The one you were so sure about? The one you bet our entire life savings on?" A flicker of dawning horror appeared in his eyes. I smiled, a cold, sharp thing. "The scandal broke an hour ago. The CEO was just arrested. The stock is worthless. I checked our account on the way here. It's all gone. Every penny." That was the final blow. He swayed on his feet, looking around the room as if seeing the faces of his peers for the first time, not as an audience for his triumph, but as witnesses to his complete and utter ruin. He had lost his award, his job, his mistress, his reputation, his mother's standing, and every last dollar we had, all in the space of 10 minutes. He turned to me, his face a mask of desperation. "Clara, you knew?" I gave him a beautiful, tragic smile. "Knew what, darling?" I asked softly. "That you were a cheating, condescending, abusive bully? Or that you were a terrible financial analyst?" I picked up my clutch from the table. "For what it's worth," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that only he could hear. "I've decided I'm not fat after all, but you are pathetic." I turned and walked away, not looking back. I could feel the hundreds of pairs of eyes on me, but their stares were no longer filled with pity. They were filled with awe. I didn't just leave my husband. I had salted the earth where his life used to be, ensuring that nothing would ever grow there again. The year that followed was a renaissance. Leaving the gala that night felt like walking out of a dark, suffocating tomb and into the clean, crisp air of a world brimming with possibility. The fallout for Mark and Eleanor was swift and merciless, a beautiful cascade of consequences I watched from a safe and satisfying distance. Mark was fired the next morning, his name becoming a cautionary tale at his firm about hubris and disgrace. The public humiliation was so total that no other reputable firm would touch him. Brenda was also fired, becoming collateral damage in the explosion he had created. Eleanor's situation was even more dire. The IRS investigation, prompted by my meticulously detailed anonymous tip, uncovered years of undeclared income and tax evasion. They were forced to sell their sprawling mansion and most of their assets to pay the back taxes and staggering penalties. Eleanor, the queen bee of her social circle, became a pariah overnight. Her wealthy friends, terrified of being implicated or simply repulsed by the scandal, abandoned her completely. The last I heard, she and Mark were living together in a small, rented 2-bedroom apartment, a bitter, resentful pairing drowning in the ashes of their former lives. My life, in contrast, began to blossom. The 20% of our savings that had quadrupled thanks to the Nexus Dynamics buyout was legally half mine. And because I had moved it into a separate account before the Innovate Futures crash, it was protected. It wasn't a fortune, but it was more than enough. It was a seed. I used that money to do what I should have done years ago. I started my own architectural design firm. I reconnected with old professors and colleagues, and my passion, so long suppressed, returned with a vengeance. My designs were bold, innovative, and infused with the confidence of a woman who had walked through fire and emerged unscathed. My firm, Phoenix Design, landed its first major project within 6 months. I bought a beautiful loft apartment downtown with soaring ceilings and massive windows, a space filled with light and air, the complete opposite of the dark, stuffy house I had shared with Mark. I filled it with art, books, and friends. Amy was a constant presence, our bond forged even stronger in the fires of my liberation. We took a trip to Italy that summer, a trip I'd always dreamed of and Mark had always dismissed as frivolous. We ate pasta without guilt, drank wine until we were dizzy, and laughed under the Tuscan sun. I felt my soul expanding to fill the space that my old life had denied me. About a year after I left him, Mark tried to contact me. He found my new number through a mutual acquaintance and left a rambling, pathetic voicemail. His voice was almost unrecognizable, stripped of its arrogance and authority, leaving only a whiny, pleading tone. He told me he had made a terrible mistake, that he had been a fool. He said he had changed, that he was going to therapy. He told me he loved me, that he had always loved me, and that his cruelty had only been a misguided attempt to help me. He begged me to see him, to give him one more chance to prove he was a different man. I listened to the entire message, a cold, detached curiosity my only emotion. When it was over, I didn't feel anger or even pity. I felt nothing. He was a ghost from another life, a stranger whose story had nothing to do with me anymore. I blocked his number without a second thought. Today, my life is full. My firm is thriving, winning awards for its sustainable and human-centric designs. I am respected, successful, and, most importantly, happy. I am in control of my own narrative. I have not only reclaimed the life he tried to steal from me, but I have built a new one that is grander and more beautiful than I ever could have imagined. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm standing by the massive window of my loft, looking out at the glittering city lights, I think about the strange miracle of my rebirth. I don't know why I was given a second chance, but I know I didn't waste it. Justice wasn't just served, it was meticulously designed and flawlessly executed. He called me fat, and in doing so, he set me free. And I left him begging in the ruins of a life he thought was indestructible, a fitting epilogue for a man who never understood that a person's true weight can never be measured on a scale.